90.5.
He has labored, he has suffered to lead his people into the land of freedom. He is the Redeemer and the champion of liberty, of human equality. Let's salute him, fellow Ghanaians, the nation's founder, Sajifo Kwame Nkrumah. May God bless him, Ghana showboy, Africa's great son, Sajifo Dr. Nkrumah.
Ago when you come with Makasa Kakra, and so when you come when Tiam Kakra, Menkasapi, Damapa Makade, Bakans Babakakran, and Yamakan Fancy. At long last, the battle has ended. And thus, Ghana, your beloved country, is free forever. And here again, I want to take the opportunity to thank the chiefs and people of this country, the youth, the farmers, the women, who have so nobly fought and won this battle. Also, I want to thank the valiant ex-servicemen who have so cooperated with me in this mighty task of freeing our country from foreign rule and imperialism. And as I pointed out at our party conference at Sorbonne, I made it quite clear that from now on
we must
90.5 change our attitudes, our minds. We must realize that from now on we are no more a colonial but a free and independent people. But also, as I pointed out, that also entails hard work. I am depending upon the millions of the country, the chiefs and people, to help me to reshape the destiny of this country. We are prepared to build it up and make it a nation that will be respected by every other nation in the world. We know we are going to have difficult beginnings, but again, I am relying upon your support. I'm relying upon your hard work. Seeing you in these thousands, it doesn't matter how far my eye goes. I can see that you are here in your millions. And my last warning to you is that you ought to stand firm behind us so that we can prove to the world that when the African is given a chance, he can show to the world that he's somebody. We shall no more go back to sleep anymore. Today, from now on, there is a new African in the world. That new African is ready to fight his own battle and show that, after all, the black man is capable of managing his own affairs. We are going to demonstrate to the world, to the other nations, young as we are, that we are prepared to lay our own foundation. As I said in the assembly just a minute ago, I made it point that we are going to say that we create our own African personality and identity. It's the only way in which we can show the world that we are ready for our own battle. But today, may I call upon you all that at this great day, Let us all remember that nothing in the world can be done unless it has the purported support of God. We have done the battle, and we again rededicate ourselves not only in the struggle to emancipate other territories in Africa. Our independence is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent. Let us now, fellow Ghanaians, let us now ask for God's blessing. And for only 2 seconds, in your thousands and millions, I want to ask you to pause only for 1 minute and give thanks to Almighty God for having led us through obstacles, difficulties, imprisonment, hardship, and suffering to have brought us to the end of our struggle today.
9:07. Today happens to be November 21st, 2017. Saturday morning it is, and as always, Saturday mornings we gather here with Mother Ghana at the back of our minds to discuss the way forward as to how to establish and ensure that Agenda Ghana becomes a reality, making Ghana the gateway to Africa, making Ghana, if possible, the gateway to the world. My name is Samuel Shen, and it gives me so much pleasure to welcome you to today's edition of Alhaji and Alhaji, the mother of all talk shows. Here, we don't mince words, we say it as it is, and as much as possible, we bring the truth to the fore in all of our discourse. Today's show promises to be quite interesting and engaging, considering the topics we are tabling for discussion today. And it all has to do with how Mother Ghana would fare tomorrow and the nearby future. This week has been one interesting week where the educational sector has dominated the conversation. Why and how did the educational sector dominate the conversation? It has to do with the statement that was put out there by CHAS through its president that all was not well with the implementation of the free SHS. What really did she say? She talked about the fact that now there seems to be some processes of intimidation and gagging that is going on within the educational sector, in the sense that headmasters and headmistresses are unable to speak about the problems and the challenges they are facing with the implementation of the free SHS. She spoke about how, the continuing students, that's the second years and the third years, are unwilling to pay for the SHS education because they say the promises that were made was to capture them, and so for only the first years to enjoy the free SHS, they would not pay the tuition. Equally, did she raise an alarm about how arrears are so much that these institutions are finding it difficult to run their various schools. Many more issues she raised with respect to how the free SHS is being implemented. She talked about the fact that if we are not careful, the system will run aground. We have had a response coming from the Ghana Education Service about how untrue that statement put out there by CHAS could be. You have listened to both sides of the story. The tangents that usually would have been lost out in the course of the deliberations would certainly be shared with you this morning on the show. Therefore, I entreat you to stay with us as we dissect this issue. It's one of the issues we are tabling today for our discussions. Also, most certainly, we would have to jump the boundaries of Ghana and go to Zimbabwe, where the man Robert Mugabe has resigned as president, and his former vice president has been sworn in as the president of Zimbabwe. The happenings leading to the resignation of Robert Mugabe is one of the issues this morning we would look at. The future for the country as to the economy, how it would fare under this new leadership, as to the foreign policy direction they would be going, as to how the West would want to interfere in the happenings within Zimbabwe. All of these would we pay attention to. We would not also lose sight of the budget reading, which happened, I think, about last week, Wednesday or so. The agricultural sector. We will take a look at the agricultural sector and pay attention to its growth and its impact on national development. These areas would we focus our attention today on. But as usual, I try to bring you up to speed with the latest in terms of the headlines of the newspapers that we have with us today. So you know the issues the newspapers are looking at today. It's a very beautiful picture on the front page of the Daily Graphic newspaper of the man Robert Gabriel Mugabe when he was very, very young. And it's on the front page of the paper. Also, SOS for Nungwa SHS. Work on toilet facility resumes. School still in session. And there have been some donations to the school. Some mobile toilet facilities have been donated to the school. Also, you find on the front page, police put Kumasi Assembly member on wanted list. And you have the picture of one Oscar Riches on the front page of the Daily Graphic newspaper. You would also find on the front page of the Daily Guide newspaper the story, Ibrahim's mining license fake. That's according to the AG. Pastor busted in married woman's room. And it's got one Reverend Kwesi Awiache on the front page of the paper. Very interesting. Very interesting. We only recognize John Mahama, says NDC. And girl 6 bent to death. That's all on the front page of the paper. You will also find on the front page of the Ghanaian Times newspaper, it's got on its front page, Queen Margaret visits Akwamu traditional area. Volta regional minister blasts assemblies for poor performance. Kumasi set to host a National Farmers Day. Zimbabwe gets new president. And who fixed Dumso? NDC, NPP fight over it. But is it really something to fight over? Well, that's all on the front page of the Ghanaian Times newspaper. I will try and share with you that of the Spectator newspaper, which has on its front page a picture of Miss Abena Koko, a mental health advocate, in a very beautiful kente cloth or kente dress on the front page of the paper. Uncle Ebo White celebrates Archbishop Nicholas Duncan William. Check your land title registration. And Daniela Akofa Awuma is a new Miss International Africa. And 10,202 children suffer from respiratory infections. That's all on the front page of the paper. I entreat you to stay glued to your sets as we commence the conversation today. And as always, I'm not here alone. I am here with my guests who will help me with these discussions and deliberations. And I have Mr. Kwesi Pratt Jr., the managing editor of the Insights newspaper, here in the studio with me. Dr. David Percy, student of history and politics, also here with me. Mr. Bernard Mona, the national chairman of the PNC. Comrade Murtala Ibrahim Mohammed, former MP for Nanton and a deputy minister for trade and industry. And we are having a third discussion of the warning by the immediate past president of CHAS on the challenges facing the free SHS policy and government's promise to address those challenges. Also, a critical look of the 2018 budget with specific attention on the growth of the agricultural sector and its impact on national development. And we will touch base with the swearing in of the new president of Zimbabwe and the economic future and related concerns. That's the issues we are looking at today. We are live across many platforms, and I encourage you to listen to us through those platforms. But you can monitor us live on our website, www.radiogold905.com. To us live, if you go to the TuneIn application and search for Radio Gold 90.5, you will find us there, and you will be able to listen and monitor us live on that network. Equally, can you monitor us live by going to the Google Play Store and searching for Radio Gold 90.5. You will find us there and install that application, and you'll be able to listen to us anywhere that you find yourself in the world. That's by way of listening to the show. Also, your thoughts, your views, and your comments play an integral part of this show, because this show is very interactive, and so we always encourage you to send us your comments even as we discuss the issues. And so kindly send it to us on these two accounts. One is Facebook and the other is Twitter, and you use the handle at Samuel Ishen GH. At Samuel Ishen GH. That's how you find me on Facebook and Twitter. It's spelled together, and the Ishen is spelled ESHUN. You can listen to us live on GFM Radio if you are in London. You can monitor us live on Sekpela 104.3 in Lekpe. So can you monitor us live on Shine 96.9 in Akachi, on Lukusi Radio 96.1 in Golokoti, Radio Pando 102.5, and SAFS Radio online. And that's how you listen to us. There are other networks as well. I understand there's a network in Kumasi that's picking the feed live. And so you can monitor us live there as well. So the conversation begins, and I would like to start off with Comrade Murtala Ibrahim Mohammed on our first topic, which has to do with a discussion on the statements and warning given by the immediate past president of CHAS on the challenges facing the free SHS policy and government's promise to address those challenges. Good morning, Comrade.
Good morning, and good morning to your cherished listeners, and good morning to my senior colleagues. Sean, I think that there is a saying that if you tell lies repeatedly, with the thinking that the lies will become an accomplished fact, these are some of the challenges that you encounter. Let me state that education is sine qua non to the progress and development of any nation in the world. So any government that jokes with education is certainly, joking with the future and the growth and the development of that nation. And you can only do that at your own peril. It's through education that you have the needed human resource base to be able to develop a country. It's through education that you have engineers. It's through education you have teachers. Through education you have nurses, you have doctors. Through education you have psychiatrists. Through education that you have journalists. Through education that you have even lawyers. You have everything through education. You certainly cannot, contemporary, the world in which we live, have those things without having so much attention given to formal education. And it is not for nothing that immediately after independence, African countries and leaders at that time felt that there was a need for something to be done urgently. And that is why countries like Zimbabwe, when they had independence, Mugabe, who is now being bastardized today, unfortunately, considered education as a human rights issue. And that is the reason why, when we had independence, Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah felt that the only way we could develop this nation, the only way that his vision and his agenda for the progressive development of Ghana could be achieved is to give much attention to education. And that explains why education was free for everybody. That explains why university education, people were fed at the universities. That is why there was a huge investment in building infrastructure in every sector, particularly in the area of education. Now, even military leaders, or if you like dictators, they themselves have also realized that there is the need for something to be done tremendously to education. So any government that jokes with education, then you are joking with the future, the destiny of your country and your people. So that is the first point. And now, even if you look at political parties contemporary, take the fourth Republican Constitution, all the political parties that contested elections in the 1992, 1996, 2000, 2004, 2008, 12, 16 have all encapsulated in their manifestos their, intention to deepen the education infrastructure, their intention to expand it, and their intention to make it accessible to everybody. Now, if you look at the last two elections that we have had, or last three elections, 2008, 2012, and 16, you come across a flag bearer who touted education as the cardinal, if you like, principle of his entire governance structure. In 2008, His Excellency President Nana Addo, then candidate Nana Addo, indeed said that he was going to implement free education. And this statement was made in Ghana. And when he had the interview on BBC, he reiterated the point. The only unfortunate thing is that he couldn't tell the entire global community the cost of his so-called free education. So it is not something that was new, if you understood what he meant when he had that interview, and also the campaign messages that he had in the 2008 elections. Again, when we come to 2012, this thing also was featured hugely in the NPP's campaign. Sean, I get the sense that a lot of our friends in the NPP perhaps, limited their reading and understanding to only the NPP manifesto, because the 2012 NDC manifesto, we had indicated the progressive free education. Now, even when Nkrumah we had independence, and Nkrumah, who did tremendously well and much in the area of education, he himself knew that considering the circumstances, that we could not have an absolute free education, that it was going to be progressive. However, some level of free education was provided. Now, I have listened to people who said that Nkrumah provided free education for the people in northern Ghana. And I shudder to think that it wasn't only in northern Ghana, it was entire Ghana that people had access to education. They were not just, it wasn't just expanding infrastructure, but also they were even fed. At the universities, people were fed, and in fact, jobs were available. You can explain that by saying that our population was not as huge as it should be today. Yes. Now, you have these elections that we had in 2016. And hugely, the free education featured again and in 2016 elections. Now, one would expect that if the flag bearer had this vision and spoke about it hugely, and it found its way in their 2008 manifesto, 2012 manifesto, and 2016 manifesto, one would expect that at least they would have done some studies, they would have done proper analysis, and they would have known how much is going to cost this country, and they would have even known how it is going to be run. The expectation also is that when they came to power, one would have expected that there would have been a policy document. Now, we have repeatedly talked about this policy document. Not that we are just talking about a document. A policy document guides you as to how you are going to even implement it, and it will even tell you a history, what informed that policy, how that policy is going to be implemented. And you can also even identify in some policy document possible challenges that you may encounter in the implementation of such a policy. We are yet to chance upon one. And I have said that we are not just asking for a paper document. It can be a soft copy. As we sit today, go to the Ministry of Education website, you still cannot find any policy document to that effect. I remember when it was announced that free education had been implemented, Charles and also NAGRAT and other teachers association, they demanded to know whether there was any document. And in fact, the list they said government could provide was even a template as to how it is going to be implemented. Something shockingly happened this morning. Whilst I was preparing to come for this program, I watched TV3, their discussions, and the host Abena read. I don't know where she was reading that from her laptop. That apparently a head of one of the secondary schools had indicated that he or she had about 80,000 Ghana cedis in the accounts of the school, and that they don't even know how to use the 80,000 Ghana cedis. So when I watched it. And Abuna asked, I think, Mr. Gentua, that in the eyes of this, that even though there are some who are complaining that they haven't had, monies, now this is a classical case of a head of an institution who says that they have 80,000 Ghana cedis. And those who watch that program can attest to this. 80,000 Ghana cedis in their accounts, they don't know how to use it. And I said, are we talking about Ghana? Or perhaps, like if I can borrow Comrade Kosumokaya, perhaps that person was reporting from 80,000 Ghana cedis. Now, I listened to the interview you had with the Director General of Ghana Education, and I was saddened. I was flabbergasted that a Director General of Ghana Education Service would make the kind of statements he made. He's an outstanding personality. He's an intellectual. He's a professor. And I think that I aspire to be the person he is. But my simple advice is that he can do good with his technical and professional work than engaging in the realm of politics, because that was precisely what he did. He made a statement that was shocking to me. He said that the problems we have today, the schools and the trees, dormitories and the trees, the challenges, that those problems will be with us in the next 10, 15 years. I was saddened because such a statement ought not be coming from the Director General of Ghana Education Service, because it should be your view that within the shortest possible time we should not have these things happening. And I believe that what the NDC government started right from Prof. Mills, reducing and ensuring that we eliminate schools and the trees, I believe that if this government has followed suit, I really believe by now we wouldn't have had schools and the trees. I am not saying that the NDC was able to eradicate entirely schools and the trees, but there is an ample evidence to testify that to a very large extent, the number of schools that were operating under trees had reduced drastically. This is what we call visionary leaders, and which was headed and indeed implemented through the directorship of a visionary Director General of Ghana Education Service. So I was shocked to hear this statement. Another statement that was also being made on that very day and in the interview you had with the professor, he said, oh, these problems are not new. These problems have been with us. I am sorry, Professor. The problems of dormitories and the trees have never been with us. They have never been with us. And if they has, I stand to be corrected. But as far as I'm concerned, and the last time I checked, there has never been any dormitory under trees where students would have to sleep under trees. We have never had that in this country, at least not in my young age. Again, I listened to another interview that GBC Ghana granted with the head of the business University of Ghana Business School. And I can understand sometimes how the MPP succeeded in more or less deceiving people into believing some of these stories. And that is why I started by saying that if you are telling a lie thinking that, that lies would culminate into an accomplished fact, then you'll be deceiving yourself. Because when reality hits, you would understand that you ought not have been engaged in such palpable lies. Now, if you listen to all the flagship programs of this government, not a single one. And when I listened to the man, he said that, the government has implemented few or commissioned few of the one district, one factory. And I said, the last time my understanding of English language is that few means it should be more than one. You can't say one is a few. And even that one, which government claimed they had commissioned, it was deflated completely. It was very clear to everybody. And subsequent interviews, they themselves admitted that that particular pineapple factory was not one of the one district, one factory. So you can tailor that with even the free education. That they come out, they chain out stories and expect people to believe. Yesterday, my attention was also drawn to the fact that a statement was made by a member of parliament who claimed on the floor of parliament that students sleeping under trees is better than students selling, dog chains on the streets. That students sleeping under trees is better than a whole lot of. And for me, I was extremely scandalized that such statements should be coming from people who are supposed to be honorable members of parliament. And you see, it all boils down to all the concerns that people raise. Now, if the MPP didn't want to listen to NDC at all, if they felt that they were in a competition with NDC, and if they felt that the NDC never meant well for them as a political party in the government, if they felt that the NDC never meant well for even Ghanaians, at least they would have listened to the voices of civil society groups. They would have listened to the voices of non-governmental organizations. They would have listened to the voices of experts in the field of education. There hasn't been a single expert, so to speak. There hasn't been a single civil society group or non-governmental organization that did not caution government, that does not raise issues about the impending implosion that we experience today when the MPP said they were going to implement the free SHS. On the issue of whether we are experiencing free SHS is another matter. What we were promised that every child of school-going age in the SSS, every single child was supposed to have free education. His Excellency Nanado, then candidate Nanado, never told us that the free SHS was going to be limited to only first-year students. And even within the first-year students, it wasn't going to be that. But Sean, I'll tell you an interesting story. And this is a life experience that I've had. Last 2 weeks, I called a gentleman to come and work on my laptop, because there were some programs I needed to put on my laptop. The gentleman came and we're talking. And now, when I engage when I have something to do with professionals, I try to find out about government policies and the whole political environment, what their views are, because I would want to test the popularity of my party and the popularity of the ruling government. So it gives me a strength in going forward, or it also helps me to see how we can strategize in this business of politics. Now, the gentleman, I asked him about the free SHS specifically, and he said that, oh, my brother, actually, I am not happy. And you know why? He said, I work at Circle, and I used to make average a day 100 Ghana cedis. Of course, there are days that he can make more than 1,000 a day. He may not even make anything, but averagely he makes 100 Ghana cedis a day. And he said that a month I make average at least 3,000. He repairs phones, he repairs laptops, and he sells some accessories. He said that last year, one of his kid brothers was going to SSS. So what happened was that he spent almost 1,000 Ghana cedis. That is 2016. He spent almost 1,000 Ghana cedis paying the kid brother's school fees that month. And he said that month, when I paid the 1,000 Ghana cedis, I was left with 2,000 Ghana cedis. Now, when the president candidate Nanado promised free education, in fact, I voted for NPP, and said for the first time I voted for NPP, that I started voting since 2004. That I voted for NPP. I asked my siblings to all vote for NPP. They voted for NPP. Interestingly, this year, the one who went to SSS last year, the one next to him, had to go to SSS this year. Now, I didn't pay anything because it's supposed to be free. But you know one interesting thing? Now, I make an average money of 30 Ghana cedis a day instead of the 100 Ghana cedis. So a month, I make 900 Ghana cedis. So even though I haven't paid school fees, but I don't have 2,000 Ghana cedis with me, I have 900 Ghana cedis. And he said the shocking aspect of it is that my brother was sent to a school that is a day school. So I had to rent a place for him. And that is very worrying. But I couldn't rent a place for this boy. So finally, we were lucky that we got someone who could take that person, that our brother. So he's staying with that person and then attending school, because the school he's posted is a day school. But I'll tell you another shocking story. I have a friend who has his kid brother, sent somewhere, I think in Upper West. The boy went there. The school is a day school. A boy of 14 years old. That boy, the only thing we need to do is to rent a place for the boy. We can't rent because we don't know anybody there. So we had to bring him back to Accra. When we brought him back to Accra and got a school for him, the school told us that the boy will not benefit free SHS. So we have to pay. Now, how free is it that even with the first year students, it doesn't cover every single student? That is one challenge. The other challenge that ought to be looked at, and we cannot joke with some of these things. Now, how many kids have rented places? How many parents have rented places for their kids? I am not going to look at the financial commitment. I am not even looking at the amount of money that is being spent to rent places for these kids. I am not going to look at that. I am going to look at the social consequences of 14-year, 13-year kids, girls and boys living on their own, 13, 14 years. They are at the mercy of unscrupulous men, particularly the girls. Some of them will be abused. Some, unfortunately, will be impregnated. And it is not out of place when we listen to Dr. Hassan Ayerga, when he said that we are going to be producing free SHS babies. That is the fact. That is the fact on the ground. That is the reality. That kids are now living on their own. Now, I ask a simple question. All the ministers and deputy ministers in this government, all those MPP communicators who would attack anybody who raises any genuine concern about the challenges that we have at hand today, will they allow their kids to be subjected to such an inhuman and deplorable conditions? I shudder to think they wouldn't. Now, if you wouldn't admit to such conditions, why would you allow the kids of very poor people to be subjected to that condition? The NDC never said anywhere that free education was not implementable. The NDC never said anywhere that free education was not good. What the NDC said, which was captured in our 2012 manifesto, captured in our 2016 manifesto, and I strongly believe will be captured in our 2020 manifesto, that yes, free education is good, but under the circumstances, let's go by what the Constitution itself says. Let's implement it progressively. And that explains why we needed to expand infrastructure first and foremost. Now, once you expand infrastructure, you train more teachers, you provide, you improve the conditions of services of teachers, then you can begin to implement it progressively, such that students will not go and will not even have classes. Students will not go and would have to sit on bare floor. Students will not go and would have to sleep under trees at the mercy of mosquitoes. And it's been reported palpably and broadly that a lot of kids have been taken to the hospitals because they are suffering from malaria as a result of they being exposed to this threatening and uncompromising weather and threatening and uncompromising mosquitoes. My understanding and my thinking of the NPP's view of making education access or accessibility of education is just that the structures are there, move in. Because I have listened to some funny argument that is being made by my friends in the NPP. And they said, now why? The NDC boasted that we expanded infrastructure. Why are we now saying that there are no facilities available to take care of the kids? My friends in NPP, get this very, very clearly. We never said that expanding infrastructure, we had enough. We had expanded infrastructure enough to accommodate all students. That is the reason why we said that what we started, allow it to move on until such a time we are all convinced that yes, we have enough infrastructure, enough classes, enough furnitures available to accommodate this. You simply refuse to listen to this logic and this reasoning. Another argument that is being made is that yes, about this number, and His Excellency, that this number of people are now in senior high school. That yes, they wouldn't have been in school if we never implemented this free SHS. His Excellency the President went to United Kingdom. And I can't tell whether because he met Theresa May and once again vaunted and touted how excellently this free SHS has been implemented. I don't think that the British government wouldn't know the reckless and shambolic implementation because information is global now. Now he talked about that. That yes, these are the number. We have a number increased to about 90,000 more students are in school. Now, my understanding of access is not just the structures. We are talking about free quality education. Accessibility is not just having the structures alone, which we do not have anyway. Accessibility includes having access to quality education, having access to classrooms, having access to furniture, having access to teaching and learning aids or materials, having access to a comfortable and stable mind to be able to study, having access to decent meal that can indeed ensure a good health such that you can study. That is my understanding of access. Now, if you want to get to know how this government is not visionary, now you have made free. You don't have structures in place. You don't have furnitures. You don't have classrooms. You don't have dormitories. And you know what is even worse? All your actions are geared towards reducing the number of teachers in a country that we already have a challenge with teacher-pupils ratio. Because with the reintroduction of the teachers and trainee allowances, you have also reintroduced a quota system. Because it is very clear that when the NDC government took this decision to remove and halt, if you like, the training teachers allowances, the number of people who were admitted into teacher training colleges indeed doubled. So what it means is that within the next few years, we are going to have more and more teachers who will be trained to be able to take care of the students who will be going there. Now look at the funny thing. I mean, I can't think far. That yes, increase, make it free education, more students come, but reduce the number of teachers who are going to teach them. In a country where already the people-teacher ratio is nothing to write home about, I won't be surprised within the next few years when we go back to the people-teacher syndrome. Have you realized that we no longer have people-teachers in Ghana? Because what the NDC government did over the years is to expand infrastructure, admit more students, so that you can have a lot of trained teachers. And it is very clear how a trained teacher can impact knowledge into a child. Untrained teacher cannot do that. That is one. Two, another very important point has to do even with the nurses. We live in a country where the nurses-patient ratio is nothing to write home about, where the Ghana midwifery themselves have indicated that we have a deficit of 38,000 nurses. Because this government is bent on fulfilling a campaign promise, let's reintroduce nursing trainee allowances, but let's reduce the number of nurses or trainees who will be admitted into the nursing training colleges by 1,600 students. So multiply 1,600 by 4. So by the time, inshallah, the MPP leaves office in 2020, they are going to deny this country 6,400 nurses in a country where we already have a deficit of 38,000 nurses. And it's the same thing that is being done to teachers. I mean, you don't need rocket science to tell you this. And now, you had teachers who had raised red flags, saying that these are the problems we are having. Now, what happened is that those teachers have been sanctioned. Some of them were transferred, and I'm not surprised. One child himself indicated that head teachers are afraid to speak out. I listened to the Director General of Ghana Education Service when you had the interview with him. He said something that was strikingly shocking to me. He said that they have given them 1,020, is it 1,020 something? 1,025 Ghana cedis. And he said that the 1,025 Ghana cedis, it includes one, uniforms, it includes maintenance, it includes teaching and learning materials, it includes, which other thing he said? PE, it includes health. He said the 1,020, and that constitutes the 20% that they have given to the schools. Now, when you ask him about the 80%, what the 80% constitute, he said the 80% constitute one. He said what's the name? Notebooks, right? Exercise books. The 80% includes exercise books and also utilities. And he said that they have had discussions with the utility providers, ECG, to see how best that can be paid. Now, how can 80% utilities is understandable, that may take a lot. How can 80% take care of utilities and exercise books? 80% and feeding. Utility, exercise books and feeding. And then 20% will take care of maintenance, takes care of uniforms, takes care of health, takes care of PE, takes care of all those things, and that it includes even feeding. By the way, those teachers, and another thing they did was that there were some allowances given to teachers. I think about 30 Ghana cedis, that allowances has been taken off. And for the first time, we have a government that is asking universities and other tertiary institutions to give percentage of the internal generated funds to the state. Now, if you observed, take the 2018 budget, juxtapose that with what was provided in 2016 for capital expenditure. In 2016, the budget that the NDC presented, capital expenditure was 7.9 billion. 2017, this government reduced it to 7.1 billion. Sean, 2018 budget, capital expenditure is 6 billion. What it means is that this government is not going to spend on infrastructure, because capital expenditure constitutes how much you spend in infrastructure. It includes schools, it includes hospitals, it includes roads. At a time when a lot of contractors haven't been paid, I ask a simple question to conclude. That Your Excellency, Mr. President, Your Excellency, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia Alhaji, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, Vice President. And I asked my good friend Napo, who finds it very comfortable to insult people because he thinks that they left some debts. I mean, if this is not class incompetence, then I'll be glad to know one. That will you allow your kids to be subjected to this inhuman, dehumanizing conditions that kids are subjected to? If you wouldn't, then what you are doing is that you are committing a crime against humanity. And I say this because it is a violation of the fundamental human rights of the kids who have been subjected to this unacceptable unacceptable conditions. And the earlier something is done about it, the better. And Dr. Ayerga was right when he said that if they know they can't do it, they should quietly swallow their pride and scrap it. Now, the worry is that you can no longer scrap this. The worry is that when the NDC, inshallah, comes back to 2020, we have to grapple with it. And that is why we think that they should put behind them the politics and listen to wisdom. That yes, we warn you about some of these things. You refuse to listen. It is not still too late. You can listen, and let's all find a solution to these unacceptable conditions.
Thank you very much, Comrade Murtala Ibrahim Mohammed. It brings us to some 15 more minutes to the top of the hour 10. If you just join us, you are welcome to the show. We are live on Global FM 10.5 as well in Ho. Mr. Bernard Mona, good morning.
Good morning. First, let me state that the idea of providing education on free basis is a welcoming idea. And it is even reinforced by the fact that our Constitution captures it very, very loudly. If you read Article 25 in its entirety, it's dedicated to education, and Article 25 falls under the fundamental human rights. That means that education is a fundamental human right, and our Constitution captures it clearly. Indeed, Article 25A says in part that basic education shall be free, compulsory, and universal. 25B says that secondary education in all its forms, including technical and vocational education, shall be made free. And it says that tertiary education shall be made progressively free. Tertiary education shall be made progressively free. If you go to the directive principles of state policy under Article 38, it captures this as something that is more for our state, and that cannot be diluted. And it reinforces the commitment in Article 25. And therefore, what it means is that, and indeed even in Article 38, the Constitution says that 2 years after coming into force of the 1992 Constitution, Parliament should demand of a government of a comprehensive program to actualizing the content of 25 and Article 38. 2 years after coming into force of the 1992 Constitution, in my estimation, is 1995. So 1995 to 2017 would be about 22 years. Question is, has any government submitted any comprehensive program on how they will manifest the provisions in the Constitution in relation to education, and in particular how education should be made free in this country? None exist up to today. It is possible that our Parliament does not read the Constitution, and they do not know that they need to request of government to submit before them this comprehensive program and policy that will ensure that we are able to actualize this. Having said that, it is also a fact that some of us are privileged to be here, courtesy education. But for education, maybe I will not be here, I will be in Zankana. And so it is important that all of us give premium and some seriousness to education and how we can make it better. And there are many ways we can look at education and how to make it better. One of the things is that I think that as a deliberate policy, our nation has decided that a lot of our pupils must not get higher education. See, you have nearly 18,000 basic schools, huh? Nearly 18,000 basic schools. And when you get to the secondary level, you have just about 1,000 senior secondary schools. And when you come to the tertiary level, you cannot count over 100. So the structure of our education itself is a pyramid. What it means is that as we are going up, a lot more people by our own actions are left off the educational ladder. And that is something that we should check. Because if you look critically, really, JSS qualification cannot grant you any job. Senior secondary education granting you a job, you will not take the income home. First degree is even a problem. So these days, second degree, and you see, not long ago, if you had completed your first degree, to be able to access second degree, you had to go and work, to go to pursue your second degree with some experience, practical experience. But because many people cannot get jobs, the universities cannot continue to do that. So immediately you finish your first degree, you go for your second degree without practical experience, hands-on the job, and then you go for your doctorate. So you see people actually have their doctorate, and they do not have They have no knowledge on how to practicalize the skills they have acquired. So we have created so many problems because of the caliber or the content of our education. So when government, and in particular President Nana Akufo-Addo, reinforced the fact that we must have free secondary education, I thought that maybe there was something that he was thinking, particularly having been a member of parliament for 12 years. He saw that parliament was not up to its responsibility of demanding of government. And therefore, if he insists on the free SHS, which obviously became his flagship campaign program, because I recall when a question was asked of him at the IEA encounter on how he will empower agriculture to become a dominant factor in our nation, he said free SHS. That was his response. So it meant that everything that President Nana Akufo-Addo was thinking was about free SHS. One would have thought that by now there would have been some policy directing how they should be implemented. And what even makes the situation worse is that we started talking about this vigorously in 2008. And recall that 2008 elections did not end in the first round. It did not end in the second round. It ended in what I describe as the tying round. So in that tying round, President Nana Akufo-Addo could have actually become president at the time in 2008. That was the time he was trumpeting the free SHS. So what programs were available to ensure the efficient and smooth running of the flagship program that the president so eloquently spoke about? He did not win 2008. 2012, I'm not sure that there was another campaign message aside free SHS. And so one would have thought that now sufficient research would have gone into it. And indeed, you recall that it was in 2008 that he was in the United Kingdom, where he then made pronouncement on how much it was going to cost, and Imani Ghana came and poo-pooed it and said it was not. The figures the president had given could not sustain the issue. So naturally, one would think that we have gone through to do some kind of deep thinking about this. I don't think we did anything. How to implement it to a successful conclusion, we did not. 2016, God was on the side of Nana Akufo-Addo. He won the elections, and at any platform, he spoke so eloquently about manifesting the free SHS that he promised to the people of Ghana. Indeed, the Minister for Education, when they asked him questions about what he was doing at the Ministry of Education, he said he is unable to sleep and that all his concentration is on ensuring that the free SHS come into fruition. So even our Minister for Education stopped working at every other thing but concentrated to make free SHS a reality. Today, the free SHS is rolled out, and the problems are more than glaring. What thinking went into it? What analysis did we put together that we did not foresee these daylight problems that are with us? We did not foresee that free SHS means that peoples must have access to accommodation. Particularly so when most of the people that we indeed will send to these schools are youngsters who possibly have not even gone on an excursion. They've not done anything without their parents. All of a sudden, they are to be left on their own without the guidance of parents and without the guidance of school teachers. They go into communities, they have to rent places to stay. Of course, depending on the character of the community, they could as well become good citizens. But if they fall on the other side, then we are doomed. Drug, sex, and all that you can think about will be at their doorsteps. And those who decide to involve themselves in this cannot at any point in time qualify to be the citizens that we want. I think I read news about Nigeria, where after people have been shortlisted and they have gone through the processes into one of the schools, medical schools, to get jobs, they did some drug tests and they realized that most of them were on drugs. But most of the people that are going to work are on drugs that they can't, because they are already struggling with 6 of such workers, and over 250 people are now being employed, and 250 are on drugs. How are they going to sustain it? The kind of environment we provide through our teaching and learning is largely responsible. It's largely responsible. Master, some of us were guided in school. But if you go and even hear our records in secondary school, we tried everything to have our own way. You understand? You did things, they will chase you here, don't do this, they will chase you here. Now that people are going to go out there without that guidance, because from classroom, they are finished. They have nothing to do with any teacher. They are going into town. The community senior high schools that were constructed, they do not have the capacity to accommodate people. So clearly, something is wrong. And the worst aspect of all this is that no one, and I'm not sure anyone says, that when you start a policy, a program, there should not be challenges. But any and every program that one intends, you do an analysis of the possible challenges and begin to remedy them. Any challenge that comes is what you could not foresee. But these ones that have come up, if we say that we did not foresee them, the world will come laughing at us and ask, what kind of mindsets do we have as a people? Yeah. So there are challenges. Even financial arrangements are not sufficient to contain the process. 20% of the amount at the beginning has been paid for the first term. No, so we are past the middle of the first term, and the rest of the money is not forthcoming. Maybe it is the reason why we have to form a company called Energy Sector Levy Act PLC, ESLA PLC. Whilst we are paying taxes, we are paying the levies to defray our energy sector levy, we are again compelled to use that vehicle to go and raise a loan. You know, they don't like calling a loan, so they say a bond. Yeah. To go and raise a loan to come and settle something that is already being settled. Maybe we will avail some resources to be able to contain the difficulties. Today, we have been told that there will be a fund that all of us will contribute to make free SHS possible. If I am contributing into something, how can that thing be free any longer? Because we are compelled by government to contribute into it. That's not free. So, honestly, it saddens when anytime people talk, they begin to bracket you. I've heard many people talk about the difficulties that we face, and they say, oh, munja omo MDC for. So I ask question. Dr. Amako Tufo is NDC. He was head of school feeding program under President Kufuor. He goes to visit some of the schools and is in tears. He can't understand, he can't believe it. But the school he visited is not in rural Ghana, it's in urban Ghana, where they possibly have opportunities. And he goes to visit that school and he's in tears. He talks about it, and you say that NDC fool. Let's say that it's even NDC persons that are talking about the ills in a policy. You will not correct them because NDC people are speaking. Are the children that are in the school, are they all of NDC parents? So there is something that is wrong, and I want to advise my brother, my friend, Matthew Poku Prempe. He is a minister, and he should be guided by some sense of decency. You know, I don't know what it takes, but let me just take a little detour. It appears that anytime the MPP or President Akufo-Addo's government is in any difficulty, all they try to do is, oh, something is not right. Yesterday, if you listen to the Minister for Health, you just start crying. Forensic report, bulldozers went and cleared the land, and so you can't find any evidence. And so it is this kind of attitude of wanting to blame every situation on the past that is not helping us to resolve basic issues that should attract a national character in terms of solution. I pray and hope that they will stop attacking individuals who are willing to speak out on some of the ills of our implementation of this flagship program so that we can correct it. Where I sit, I don't think that rolling it back or cancelling the free SHS is the way out. Where I sit, every effort must be put in to ensure that we right the wrongs and even move further to actualize Article 25C, where it talks about progressive tertiary education. Because really, if somebody obtains free senior high school, comes out with flying colors, and is not able to pay to the next stage of education, it is much ado about nothing. So whatever thinking that must be put in place, we should, so that Ghana will qualify in terms of global indices on education and quality education.
Thank you very much, Comrade Bernard Mona, for your submission on our first topic. It brings us to some 4 minutes after 10. If you just join us, this is Alhaji and Alhaji, the mother of all talk shows. I welcome your thoughts, your views, and your comments, and you can send them to me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle at Samuel Ishen GH. It's all spelled together, and the Ishen is spelled ESHUN. Many of you send me messages, but problem is, because you are not friends with me on Facebook, when you send the messages, it takes me maybe a week or two. Because we're not friends, it doesn't give me that notification indication that you sent me a message. So it's better you add me, and then I can receive your messages and read them out loud. But you can follow me on Twitter as well and start sending your messages through. I'll come to you, Mr. Pratt.
Well, first, I think it has to be made abundantly clear that education is a very, very important sector of the national life. It's an important sector of the national life to the extent that it is through education that we preserve civilization and also extend the frontiers of civilization. It is through education that we pass on knowledge from previous generations to the current generation and enable the current generation to expand the frontiers of knowledge. It's through education that we provide the skills for national development. It is through education that our people enhance their participation in the processes leading to advancement in the nation. But you see, there are different models of education. We have different strategies for providing education to society and its members and so on. The model we select, the process of selecting the model is also a process of determining the kind of society we want to build. So, if you want to build a society of privilege, your educational system is tailored towards selecting the privilege. If you want to build a society based on privilege, the whole educational system is geared towards that. If you want to build a democratic society in which citizens are equal and so on, your educational system reflects that. If you want to build a society, an enlightened society, a society that is proud, of its achievements, a society that is proud of its history and so on, your educational system reflects that. But it's important also to know that the type of society you want to build cannot just be shaped by the kind of educational system you build. The kind of society you want to build is shaped by the educational system you build. It is shaped by the land tenure system. It is shaped by the type of agriculture you engage in. It is shaped by everything in the society. So you cannot develop education as an island. Education has its linkages with all the other sectors of the economy. And the most important thing, first of all, is to decide the kind of society you want to build, and then you can build the various sectors in order to achieve that. In this debate about free SHS and so on, I've not seen the linkage established between education and agriculture. I've not seen a deliberate linkage established between education and industry. And I've not seen a deliberate linkage established between education and culture and so on. We are just talking about senior high school and access to senior high school. What does all of this mean? When we have expanded access to senior high school, what quality product do we expect? What is the kind of quality we expect at the end of senior high school? How would graduates of the senior high school be fully integrated in the national effort for improvement and advancement? At the end of the senior high school, what happens? Is it a terminal point? If it's not a terminal point, how is that then integrated into tertiary education? What kind of skills do we expect people who go through senior high school to acquire and so on? All these fundamental questions are being ignored. Now, if all these fundamental questions are being ignored, and they are being ignored by the government, which wants to be credited for introducing the free senior high school, and by the opponents of the government, all of us are not answering these fundamental questions, and that's a huge problem for me. The discussion of free senior high school and so on began a long time ago. Indeed, after independence, when government decided to introduce free education and the accelerated development of infrastructure and so on, there were serious arguments at the time. Those arguments continued after the February 1966 coup. And I recall very, very clearly that after the February 24, 1966 coup, a decision was taken, deliberate decision was taken to cancel free education and to introduce other models. And I remember, I was a very young boy then, but I do remember the struggles which were waged by people like Ebo Hetchful. Today, I don't think many people will remember Professor Ebo Hetchful, who was then a young lecturer at the University of Ghana. And I remember the confrontation with Dr. K.A. Buzia. Indeed, Dr. K.A. Buzia had gone to the campus of the University of Ghana, and he was confronted by Ebo Hetchful, who argued forcefully that the luxury exhibited by Buzia could have gone into funding education, and that would have been a more useful, investment than buying luxury cars and so on. Of course, if you come to a recent past, as far as I can remember, in the 1992 campaign, the National Independence Party, the Popular Party for Democracy and Development, the People's Heritage Party, and so on, all advocated one form of free education or the other. That is 1992. Since then, if you look at the manifestos of the Nkrumah's parties, and of course, I would include the Progressive People's Party and so on, they've persistently advocated free education. Indeed, some of them have advocated free education at all levels. The National Democratic Congress over the last two elections advocated what it called progressively free senior high school. And it premised that on the 1992 Constitution, which said that education ought to be free, progressively and so on. The problem there is that the 1992 Constitution stipulated in clear terms that education ought to be free within a 10-year period. We have way gone beyond the 10-year period. And I think it's an indictment on all of us that we've not been able to achieve what the 1992 Constitution set out to do. Now, be that as it may, the introduction of free senior high school, comprehensive free senior high school, became the flagship of the MPP campaign. Indeed, the MPP last year and the years before then did not believe that the introduction of free senior high school ought to be progressive. It argued very, very strongly, vehemently, that Ghana had the resources to introduce free education, free senior high school, comprehensively. The NDC stuck to his guns and insisted that it ought to be done progressively. Then the New Patriotic Party won power. And indeed, the first indications that it wanted to keep its promise was when Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, His Excellency the President, addressed the speech and prize-giving day of Ekwapimang Secondary School. And he delivered a speech which spelled out what he meant by free senior high school. Indeed, when I read the speech, I was alarmed. I was alarmed not because I had an objection to the introduction of free senior high school. I was alarmed not because I thought that free education should include the supply of uniforms, the supply of textbooks, the supply of exercise books, the supply of the payment of sports fees, and so on. That was not why I was alarmed. I was alarmed because we knew the conditions of the national economy. I was alarmed because we knew the global economic situation and so on. I was alarmed because we are also painfully aware of the level of infrastructural, development in our country. And I'm not talking about educational infrastructure. I'm talking about all of our infrastructure and so on. I was alarmed because we are also painfully aware of the revenue situation in the country and so on. And I said to myself that why would the president make these commitments, bold as they were, but apparently unrealistic at the time? But who doesn't want free education? Everybody wants free education. In fact, we just do not want free education. If tomorrow morning we have a government which will say that every Ghanaian will have free petrol, we will clap for the government. If tomorrow morning we have a government which will provide us with free electricity, we'll be very happy. If tomorrow morning we have a government which will provide us with free water, we'll be very, very happy. If tomorrow morning we have a government which will give us free food, we'll be very happy. If tomorrow morning we have a government which will give us free cars, we'll be very happy. If tomorrow morning we have a government which will give us free housing, who would object? You understand? So the important point is not the pledge. The important point is not the promise. The important point is how the promise can be kept. The important point is how realistic the pledge is. And the important point is how all of the free things contribute to building an egalitarian, democratic society of citizens working to improve their standards of education, their standards of industry, their standards of science, and so on. How all of this come together to do that. Now this week, the free SHS program has become topical again, and everybody everywhere is discussing it for one reason. The president of CHAS, the Conference of Heads of Assisted Secondary Schools, made a statement during the speech and prize giving day of the Winneba Secondary School. The lady, Mrs. Kofi, said very clearly that the resources that the schools needed to implement the free SHS policy are simply not available. Then she also made the point that many of the heads of schools are unable to complain about the existing conditions because of intimidation and victimization. These are the 2 points that were made by Mrs. Kofi. Now, the reaction to Mrs. Kofi has been very, very interesting. Of course, people in government communicators of the ruling party have described her in some instances as an unpatriotic citizen seeking to destroy the free SHS program. And I've been wondering the basis of that. Because in her speech, she committed herself fully to the introduction of the free SHS program. She said it was a good program. The heads of institutions accept that this is a program which would contribute to improving access to education. And she made the point that every effort ought to be made to ensure the success of the program. Indeed, she said that it was the duty of the heads of the assisted secondary schools to ensure that this program becomes successful. Now, there are two things. It appears from the reaction to her that there are those who believe that sycophantic praise of the policy is the way to advance it. That even if things are wrong, even if the resources are not there and so on, if we want the policy to succeed, let's simply sing hallelujah and say that everything is okay. Of course, that can only lead to disaster. What we need to do in order to ensure that this policy succeeds is to speak out where there are difficulties, to think through the difficulties, and to find solutions to the problems that confront the implementation of the free SHS program. Now, I've been listening to some of the reactions to Mrs. Kofi. And one of the reactions, which was published, I think, on Wednesday by Daily Graphic on its front page, came from the Ghana Education Service. And the Ghana Education Service is saying that, well, it is not our fault that we haven't made all the resources available to the schools. Indeed, it is the fault of the headmistresses and headmasters. And that we asked them to bring returns. So far, only 56 out of 674 schools have brought the returns. And that is why the resources have not gone to them. Now, I find this reaction shocking, exceedingly shocking. Now, look at those of us around this table. If the Ghana Education Service comes to tell us that there has been no feedback, there has been no report back, that the details that would enable them to transfer the remainder of the financial commitment to the implementation of free SHS has not come to them, and that only 56 out of 674 schools have complied with the directive, what can we do about it? What is the point in the Ghana Education Service telling me that the schools are not submitting returns? That is their responsibility. It is their responsibility to ensure that the schools submit the returns. They have a responsibility to ensure that the funds that are needed gets to the schools for the smooth implementation of the program. So complaining to us about the non-submission of returns is really a very fruitless and useless enterprise. We do not want to hear complaints. We want the solutions to be administered. Now, there's something which is very interesting about this complaint from the Ghana Education Service. I mean, I'm hearing on a daily basis, everywhere, even this morning, I heard some officials say it, that as a result of the introduction of the free senior high school, enrollment figures have ballooned. The same people are telling us that they don't have the data. So on what basis did they come to the conclusion that the enrollment figures have ballooned? Or the data for sending resources is different from the data from determining how many people have been enrolled in the schools? I mean, incredible. Totally illogical. Completely illogical. So you see that these are arguments of convenience. These are responses of convenience. There's no logical trend. And indeed, there's an assumption that perhaps the rest of us are yo-yo. And we are incapable of thinking, and so on. Because if you cannot determine the number of children enrolled in the schools, you cannot determine whether or not there has been an increase in enrollment. So that propaganda falls flat, and so on. Now, I believe that there are two elements. Those two elements are applicable in all phenomena. Those two elements are applicable in all endeavors and so on. These two elements have to do with quantity and quality. You understand? Quantity and quality. It does seem to me that we are not placing a lot of emphasis on quality. It seems to me that we are placing substantial emphasis on quantity in the implementation of the senior high school program. And that must be a worry for everybody. First, as demonstrated by my friend and comrade, former Minister Murtala Mohammed, there is a discernible lack of commitment to increasing the numbers of teachers. You understand? Now, if you have any educational system in which there's a discernible lack of interest in increasing the number of teachers, there are issues of quality arise. Because teacher-student ratio is an important index in the prediction of quality, in the determination of quality and so on. And we can see clearly that now quotas are being introduced in the enrollment of teacher trainees. The introduction of quotas simply means that we are cutting down on the number of teachers we are training. And that should be worry for everybody. Now, about 2 weeks ago, there was a development which for me was very significant, but which passed virtually unnoticed by many people in our society. There were teachers who have been recruited who are complaining bitterly that they are not being paid. There are teachers who are threatening to go on strike because their back pay has not been paid. And this passed quietly. I'm wondering, we say that, look, it's important to take care of the welfare of teachers, to make teachers comfortable and so on. So we'll pay trainee teachers allowances. But when they graduate and they start working, we don't pay them. Hey, baby, I hope you get what I'm saying. It is okay to provide incentives, to give them trainee allowances whilst they are in training. But when they finish their training and they are working, you don't pay them. Abba. I can't think far. As who said that? Was it Murtala or Bernard? I can't think far. I can't think far at all. But this passed without much comment, I think 2 weeks ago. But this is also the indication for me that perhaps we as a society, as a country, have not thought through all the things that we are doing in the education sector clearly. That's a source of worry for me. Now, let me say this. I do not think that we have to complete all the infrastructural developments in the country before we start taking measures to improve access. I think that we can do that, as the French say, para passo. You understand? It is possible. And indeed, the previous administration started doing some of that. The previous administration introduced some bursaries. They knocked off some fees and so on, as part of the measures to increase access, whilst at the same time they embarked upon a massive infrastructural development. So it is possible to couple the two. But in coupling the two, we have to strike a balance which is realistic and which is sustainable. That is all I think is important to say on this matter. I am deeply troubled by some of the videos and still pictures I'm seeing from around the country. And indeed, I'm not surprised at all that somebody like Dr. Amoako Tufo, who is a distinguished member of the New Patriotic Party, is really a founding member of the New Patriotic Party and has recently been appointed onto the board of the Young Entrepreneurs YEA, and so on. You understand? Youth and something. You understand? I'm not surprised that he actually claims to have broken down like a baby and wept when he saw the conditions under which the free SHS was being implemented. Now, this is not the president of the heads of assisted secondary schools. This is not the general secretary of the National Democratic Congress. This is not Bernard Mona. This is indeed Dr. Amoako Tufo, appointed by President Kufuor as head of the school feeding program, only recently appointed by President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo to help superintend the effort to create jobs for the youth and so on. He's saying that he broke down and wept. Well, he's not the only person. Charles has spoken, and spoken very eloquently and clearly about the conditions. That is not all. Send Ghana, an NGO which has been involved in education for a long period of time, made a statement over the last week. And when I read that statement, I quivered. Send is saying that the conditions under which children are going to school are appalling, and that educational standards could fall substantially if some remedial action is not taken urgently. This is SEND. SEND is not MPP, SEND is not NDC, and SEND is not the Convention People's Party. So there is a problem, and the problem needs to be fixed. There are many things we can do. And you see, there's a certain phenomena in this society, not just in this society, it's in all societies. A lot of interest groups jumped onto the bandwagon of the New Patriotic Party for various reasons. Some legitimate, some illegitimate, some genuine, some not genuine, and so on. But a lot of interest groups jumped onto the bandwagon, and it is their right to jump onto the bandwagon and to campaign for the victory of the New Patriotic Party. Now, some of these interests have developed a certain attitude which is not healthy at all. And the attitude is simply this: this is our victory, and we would not spoil our victory by speaking the truth. We have won a victory which must last, and if we speak the truth, we will damage that victory. And there's a lot of that coming up in the criticism of Dr. Amoako Tufo. So I heard somebody say that, but Dr. Amoako Tufo is part of the NPP. Why is he providing ammunition to our opponents? Why is he saying things that will lead to our defeat in 2020 and so on? I think that attitude is unhealthy, and it's unhelpful to the president, and it's unhelpful to the New Patriotic Party. Look, there is no hand which is large enough to cover the rays of the sun. People who try to block the rays of the sun with their hands must be a bit loony. Yes, it's an impossible thing to do. These senior high schools are spread across the country. They admit children from all the corners of our society. The truth in the senior high schools cannot be hidden, not by anybody. And those who think that if they have access to microphones, cameras, and they have some pens and paper and so on, they can alter the reality, are only deceiving themselves. Because the reality is already available to everybody. What we all need to do is to accept that reality. And if that reality is bad, fight, work to improve that reality. I want the free SHS program to succeed. I've said over and over again that look, if Cuba, with its very limited resources, can provide free education from the cradle to the grave, from day nursery to PhD and so on, Ghana has no excuse in limiting access to education by the imposition of fees. If Cuba can do it, we must be able to do it. And that's my attitude. But you see, Cuba did it because it planned, and planned very well. Because it faced the reality. It didn't do it by running away from the reality or distorting the reality. And I'm afraid that there are too many of us who are involved in this enterprise of shading the sun. It's an impossible task.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pratt, for your submission. It brings us to some 24 minutes more to the top of the hour 11. You're still here with us on Alhaji and Alhaji, the mother of all talk shows. We're live on GFM Radio in London, Sepala 104.3 in Lekpe Shine, 96.9 in Akachi, Lukusi Radio, 96.1 in Vet, Golokwati. Also live on Radio Gold 90.5, Radio Pando 102.5, SAPS Radio Online, and equally live on Global FM 105.1 in Ho. You can also monitor us live if you go to the Google Play Store and search for Radio Gold 90.5. You see the application. You can install that and you'll be able to listen to us in any part of the world. I'll be reading to you a few of your text messages that have come in the form of tweets and Facebook messages, and so do kindly stay with us. Dr. Percy, good morning.
Thank you very much. Well, any fool could have spoken about the problems that we are running through. Indeed, any idiot could have said so. Because an idiot is a high level of foolishness. But such was the desperation of the MPP under Nanado, our president now. And to a certain extent, they were assisted by what I'll call the ideological and political incompetence of the ruling party then. Said that Ghanaians voted like they were children. Mr. Pratt has already made the point that who doesn't want a free thing? But at least adults know, or they ought to know, that whatever is delivered free must have been paid for through some arrangement and through some means. And he's made a point about the fact that Cuba provides free education at all stages. But allocations are made for it. Now, the kind of education system you have speaks to, first, the kind of society you want to build. Second, education itself, in terms of its access, quality, is a key instrument in delivering that society. And one of the things that we hardly hear spoken about, but which is always present, in fact, is the key driver. are the various class interests at play here? I'm sure we have all heard the statement that have been made by various leading lights in the MPP about the fact that but for free education, so and so would not have come this far, said that he or she can even utter a word when people like us speak. And that reflects the outlook and the position of our president and of his party. But they believe that education should be a matter reserved for the privileged, for the elite. Okay? Now, of course, in the run-up to the election, what you needed was sufficient bodies of ordinary people in their numbers, believing and buying into your program in order to farm you into power. Okay? So the ordinary people were conned into thinking that, oh, free education, because the attraction of that promise, lies in the fact that education is the single largest investment that most households make. It's a regular, timely ritual. If schools are going to reopen, it's a large headache for most households. Not all households, but for most households. Okay? The magic wand of free education, I think, had been launched in 2008. It did not work. Okay? It was launched in 2012. It did not work. But 2016 was crucial. Candidate Nana Addo had no realistic chance of leading the MPP again if he did not win. So everything was thrown into the struggle. And Kwesi has just made a point about some interest groups who were on the side of the MPP, who have been, how shall we say it, judicious and very careful with their criticism of what is going on. But really, that is the entire thing. Politics is about class interests. Every few years, in our case, every 4 years, there's a set-piece battle, which is won depending on the strategies and the tactics that people adopt. In the course of the last contest, various elements of the MPP, in academia, in the media, wherever they were, in the clergy, did everything they could to secure victory. Such was the hunger, and such was the determination of their leader, that whatever happens, this time he has to win. One of the elements of that strategy was the grooming of the MPP paramilitary forces that people call vigilantism. It's a complete misnomer. The MPP set up deliberately to build a paramilitary force in the event that they did not win the ballot, to unleash mayhem and eventually deliver victory, or at the very least, a power sharing arrangement. Because mind you, there were huge obligations, huge debts that have been built up over the course of the previous campaigns that needed to be settled, which also explains many of the moves of our Minister of Finance. But I should not digress from the issue of education. Now, so at its core, leading lights in the MPP, the party itself believes that education should not be the business and should not be the right of everybody. And there are some citizens, certainly those who are less Ghanaian, who don't deserve to have it. If they may have been conned into believing that it could be delivered after victory, well, the way to go about it is to pursue a path that utterly destroys public education, free education so-called, and creates a market for private investors. Some of their leading ideologues are involved in that very area. And very soon, based on the trajectory that we are on, nobody will be interested in free education. That is, no right-thinking parent or household will be interested in free education. And I say this based on my own personal experience. Close to 60 years ago, I went to primary 1, right, in a place called Osu Home School. Today we call it Saito, right? Osu Home School, right? By class 3, it had been turned into one of the experimental schools, I think the second or the third. And I went to Fansfim from class 6. It was a path that was trodden by many after me. But today, in fact, long ago, more than 20 years ago, it was virtually impossible for anybody to take that path to public basic education, to get into secondary school, to have any realistic chance of getting into higher education and what you might call a reasonable paid job. The effect is that today, teachers, policymakers, persons superintending over basic education, primary basic education, do not send their children to public schools. No minister does that. No head teacher does that. The teachers don't do that because they know that it is an avenue to nowhere. Now, with this fine policy, I hear people saying that, oh, it's a fine policy. A fine policy theoretically, or fine policy based on the practical steps that have been outlined to achieve it. Because you could say that something is fine conceptually, right? But it's another thing to say it's fine when the steps to implement it have clearly not been put out or are clearly inadequate. And as we know, you could say that ahead of the last election, the NDC's argument was superior. How come people didn't buy it? It was a superior argument. What had happened said that the Ghanaian electorate suspended belief and went to fantasy land. Those are important questions that must be asked and answered. But I have no doubt, having con your way into power in the morning, you must con your way through every problem that arises in the afternoon you must con your way in the evening. Indeed, you must con your way for the rest of your term. Which is why any criticism will be repressed. And that's why the head of CHAS was complaining. It started right even before the rollout. People asked to know the guideposts. Okay? But as for the leaders of the MPP, they are at peace. But they say that, look, there's nothing that you implement that goes without challenges. Okay? But we are not, when we say that, we are not talking of these kind of challenges that could have been foreseen. Okay? Usually you're talking about challenges that are consequent upon your intervention that could not have been predicted because other things have happened. Okay? And there's an interaction. But look, if you say you're holding a wedding, say you, Mr. Host, say you're holding a wedding, knowing your popularity, you know the number of persons who would like to come, maybe a few hundreds, and your resources and facilities are allocated for only 50. You know there's going to be chaos. Like I said, any fool, any idiot can tell you that. So the challenges, the problems that are arising cannot be put in that category. That even when you claim to have succeeded, that success itself generates conditions for new problems. The problems we are talking about are the most basic, the most elementary. But really what we are dealing with is a government that doesn't care. Ideologically, they don't think that it is a business of everybody to be educated. They don't believe so. They are firmly committed to sustaining the social inequalities, indeed expanding them. And it has come out clearly on so many occasions, by word and by deed. And we should not be surprised. Our president believes that to his very core. He believes that leadership of this country belongs to him, his family, a small core of people around him. And that is how policy is going to be implemented. And we have no right to be surprised. But we have no business being surprised. If there's any anger, it is redirected at those political forces that allow or enable the people to be conned. Because they suggest that it is possible to achieve a middle path between a society of equality and a society of inequality. They perpetrate the myth that it is possible to achieve that, when we know that that is fallacy. So maybe when we are fully finished wrecking the educational system, we'll come to understand that these matters are not to be trifled with. That it's our business, it's our duty to enable people to understand that the key thing in every situation are the interests at stake. Because bad as what is happening may be, it's going to work for some people. It's going to be very profitable in a few months, in a few years, for a few people. In much the same way that private education has become profitable at the primary level, and even at the tertiary level. And some will say, look, if private education is the in thing at the basic level and has become well established at the tertiary level, what are we doing sustaining a middle section which is public? Might as well add it to the lot. That is how I see what is happening. And we are not going to get away from it anytime soon, because there are no cosmetic solutions to it. None. So it's about time that we came to understand that, this thing goes right to the heart of what kind of society we want to build. Whether we want to build a society where only a few have access to education and to health and to the good things of life, and where the mass of our people are condemned to exploitation, poverty, illiteracy, backwardness, oppression. Or whether we want to struggle to build a society that is guided by the principle of equality, equal opportunity. Okay? Because the truth is that you can make anything you want to make free. Like the military. If there was going to be an attack, if there's an attack on Ghana this morning, I'm sure we will not pass the hat around like is it the Minister of Finance is proposing that we do Lala Solila to finance education. You would expect that the military would do its job. Similarly, you don't expect the police to pass the hat around to raise resources to deal with crime. So, what a society makes provisions for, that it provides free at the point of delivery, says a lot about what it wants to be, its future. Now, the future that the MPP and our president has for us is very clear. It is really very, very clear. It's about installing or reinstalling or reinforcing a future of privilege, so that when people speak, others will just shut up because they are not deserving, they are not equal citizens. If anybody is interested in resisting that, they must recognize that the solution to that also requires counter-mobilization. It will not happen just by giving things to God or by wishing that things would turn out well. It requires mobilization, organization to challenge the direction of policy. And often I wonder how it is possible for journalists and others to speak about matters of policy and insist that we keep politics out. I wonder. But that's what it is. Those are my points.
Thank you very much, Dr. David Percy. Few text messages that have come through. Let me go through them before we move to our next issue, which we should start in the next maybe 10 minutes. And Stephen Kwabnatu sends the message. Good morning, Samin. I listened to government operatives respond to the president of Charles and I got heartbroken. You go on to say, their response to the woman was as if she was speaking to the issues of Winneba Secondary School. They failed to recognize that this woman is president of Charles speaking for all schools. This does not have anything to do with Winneba. We have seen students sleeping under trees, learning under trees, feeding under trees, dining on parks, amongst others. This is what government must address. Have a good day. Good morning to you as well, Steve. This one from Starring Wendell says, Efo Marina, the vaingloriousness at which this government is going about this free SHS thing is quite disheartening. It's most pitiable to see Students who I describe as toddlers being subjected to these dehumanizing treatments as this government stuck in a quagmire of obstinate fatuity is deluding itself and trying proposals to correct things. Good morning. McDowell sends the message I was privileged to have taught in Salaga Senior High School between 2003 and 2012. I quite remember that in 2006, when all senior high schools in the country reopened, the 3 northern senior high schools students were still at home because former President Kufuor said there is no money for feeding grant. Therefore, these schools could not reopen, whilst the senior high schools in the rest of the 7 regions were in session. If former President Kufuor could not find money for 3 regions, how can President Akufo-Addo get the money for the 10 regions? God save our education from these people. That's from McDo. This one from Musa Abatua says, Ishen, when we talk about issues about the flop in the free SHS policy. In order for government to sit up, they say we are doomsayers. The fact is, government rushed for political expediency without taking so many issues into consideration to implement the program. And you lost me a bit there, but I believe the point has been made, Musa. Let me read this final one on Facebook. Good morning to you, Ishen, and to your able panelists. Did we even wait for someone to tell us the free SHS education is currently in shambles? You can lie your way to power, but never can you lie your way to rule. The free SHS was rushed in to be implemented by this incompetent government to fulfill their campaign promises. It's a shame and disgusting what is happening under the free SHS. This one from Sami Agunyo. He says, good morning, Sami. Greetings to you and your panelists. My concern is petroleum prices going up every day, and it's making life difficult for the citizenry. MPP should do something about it. And that your contributions that have come through so far on the show in terms of the Facebook messages that I've received. Let me go to Twitter and read a few of the tweets that have come through. This one from Stephen Gau tweets and says, this government should walk the talk and spare us the lies and their promises. We've had enough. And another one from Felix Nyonyo says, good morning, Samuel. Can't NPP use all the billboards erected across Ghana to resolve the problem in SHS in this country? Dr. Percy, God bless you. Felix again says, most SHS now are during business. Okay, is it doing business you meant to say? They are selling sandals, pajamas, and a whole lot with exponential increased fee rates. Patrick Aaron tweets and says the free SHS is impregnated with flaws and could give birth to innocent babies called failures. Idrisu ABF Hussein says we should blame ourselves for voting for this incompetent president. As a result of the so-called free SHS, they have forgotten free can't give us quality. Let me check this one. Yusuf Haruna says the NPP is touting empty achievements. The real achievements were achieved by the NDC before the NPP won power. And Hack BS tweets and says Africa is the DNA of Mugabe. He is the only African left in the continent. And those are a few of your tweets that have come through this morning. Let me check out this one. Baba Musa sends the message quite a lengthy one, but I doubt I'll go through all of it. Good morning, Ishen, and to your able guests. I have read a quote attributed to an NPP minister who reportedly said that it's better to have free SHS on the trees than on the streets. I think if it's true, then it's just an explanation for the mess we find ourselves in as a country as far as the NPP's free education program is concerned. What significance exists between the JHS dropout and an SHS dropout in terms of meeting the basic job requirements in the economy we find ourselves in? Simply put, passing through the 4 corners of SHS 1, 2 to 3, continue to the tertiary level is not an automatic guarantee that a person will find a sustainable or decent job. Going by the logic of the said minister, it means that the current form of the free SHS will only succeed in postponing the possible dropout of the students from the JHS to the SHS level. A very lengthy message you sent through this morning. Daniel sends the message. Daniel Osa sends the message. Sami, we saw these free SHS challenges coming. We advise NPP, they never toolkit. There was a final text message. Let me look for that message and read it before we move on to other issues. This one's from Michael Adihoha. Says, Sammy, I'm enjoying the submissions your panelists are making today. They are making my day. And a final one, this one is coming from Helen. Helen would like for me to say a very, very good morning to Na Ayele Peterson, who graduated, and she says, I'm a congratulator on my behalf and the entire family. We love her and cherish her so much. And you say, in there, Sister Charlotte, Helen, and Isaac say they love you. So that's by way of the text messages that have come through this morning on the show. We're live on GFM Radio, London, Sekpela 104.3, Likpe Shine 96.9, in Akachi Lukusi Radio 96.1, Vet Golokwati Radio Pando 102.5, Global FM 105.1 in Ho, and South Radio Online. You can monitor us live as well on our website, www.radiogold905.com. We are moving on to our second issue, which has to do with the budget that was read and the emphasis on the agricultural sector and its impact on national development. And I will start off that segment with Dr. Percy, a student of Agric, who has become a student of history and politics. Yes. So, Doc, I will start with you. I look at the 2018 budget with a specific attention on the growth of the agricultural sector and its impact on the national development.
Well, I mean, I made a point earlier about education, but you could say that about every sector of the real economy as well. I mean, all politics, all policy is about interests or driven by the interests of one social class or another. Or put another way, policies cannot work for all. There'll be gainers and there'll be losers. Okay. And for the last several decades, the mainstay of our agricultural policy has been the issue of, it's an euphemism actually, of agricultural modernization. Okay, I'm sure you've heard it often. Yes, transforming agriculture, modernizing it. And these days they speak about agribusiness and bringing in interests that would transform the agricultural sector. But actually, the very first point, you might call it your point of takeoff, must be the issue of land. But the land issue relates to every area of the real economy, whether it is housing, whether it is industry. Land. Okay. Now, you have a situation in our Ghanaian agriculture where the bulk of producers, you could put in brackets, investors in agricultural production, work or operate in conditions of insecurity of tenure. But it has been with us for a very long time. You have a situation where, under the traditional system, if you're a member of a particular group, you have access to land so long as you're using it. But you cannot invest in it in any reasonable way. Okay? And people have adapted to it by what has been termed shifting cultivation. It's an adaptation to a situation of communal holdings where individuals cannot be allocated land permanently. So you found this area because of weeds and because of the loss of fertility, after a few years, you have to move on to another plot. So we call it shifting cultivation. This was an adaptation. And by and large, that is the mainstay of agricultural production, which continues to be based on many smallholder families, many smallholder households. They account for at least 80% of agricultural production. Now, when they speak about agricultural modernization and transformation, they're basically talking about replacing these millions of smallholder farm households with large scale, of course, mechanized agriculture based on wage employment. It's about basically replicating in the rural economy the same kind of processes that are happening in industry, promoting the growth of big business, so to speak. And all the policies that we've been working on lately, whether it is a plant breeders bill or whatever, are all tailored towards accelerating that development. And every day, not just in agriculture, you hear issues about land. Recently, it has been about land guardism. Okay. Yes. Yes.
Land guardism.
Yes. Because they are related. You understand? Land, its use, who allocates it, who has it, for how long, is at the very basis of all investments. If I was to give you a plot of land for a year, you will not build a factory on it. You will not build a permanent house on it. Okay? So in a certain sense, we are not even at what you might call the foundation level of what is required to transform the agricultural sector. We are not. Because I do not read in this budget any policy about land reform that would secure or give agricultural producers security of tenure. Right? Now, if you had security of tenure, our government would not need to have gone to the length, or the MPP would not need to have gone to the length of promising one village, one dam, for instance. Okay? And irrigation will not remain the tiny sector that it is, given the situation where rainfall is unpredictable and seasonal. I'm saying that irrigation will not remain the small sector it is, given the situation, or our situation, national situation, where rainfall is seasonal and unpredictable. Why are farmers not investing in dams, in dugouts, in wells, and in measures to conserve water, without which they cannot produce? It's because they're basically operating on the basis of insecure holdings. If any Ghanaian government, but any government in the world, is interested in agricultural progress, the first thing it has to do is to grant or to provide conditions where producers have security of tenure, that they can use the land for 20 years certain, for 25 years certain, for 30 years or whatever. Then they will invest. And that's the story of all agricultural transformation and of all agricultural progress. Those conditions do not exist in our country. If you are to go to even neighboring Togo you go to Burkina, to go to La Côte d'Ivoire, they have policies and programs to deal with this problem and to assure holders of a certain basic security of tenure so that they can invest. I'm making this general argument that investment in any sector, whether in agriculture, whether in housing, whether in industry, cannot start without security of land tenure. It's the same security that generates or that creates the conditions for the generation of slums. And you can go around Accra. Every corner you find slums growing up. Because you have conditions of insecurity and no social housing. So people must live. So they are putting up in kiosks. In every small corner. I mean, you find them at the most, perhaps unimaginable. But hey, there's space. People must find a place to lay their head. Having a place to lay your head is a very important matter for any house, and for any level of security of anybody's existence. You cannot have any secure existence if you don't have a place to lay your head that's secure. Okay, but I'm going back to the area of I'm saying that the very first condition for agricultural progress is non-existent. So when people talk about agricultural progress and transformation, I wonder what they're talking about. But actually, I think that it's clear what they're talking about. They're talking about a situation where you have a few landholders, large landholders with secure rights, who then employ the many hands as wage workers. Okay, and one of the first things I had to unlearn after my it was interesting, Kwesi and the rest saying that I am an expert in agric, because I went through agric school, yes. But one of the first things I had to unlearn right after graduation, many of the things I was taught in agric school, because the instruction almost assumed away the population currently on the land and replaced it with a fantasized system where you had mechanization, etc., etc. But you have a situation where you have at least 2 million farm households, at least 2 million. That is, you're talking of at least 9 million, could be more, okay, persons in that sector. We keep saying that the agriculture is declining. The real situation is that any and everybody who can run away from that sector is doing so, because they live in a situation of insecurity, high risks, and low returns. And you will not stay there if your conditions are one of insecurity, high risks, and low returns. So that is a problem, fundamental problem that we have. And we are looking to progress. That is what we must turn our attention to. Then the smallholder farmer, whether he has 2 acres or 3 acres or 5 acres or 10 acres, will spend time to conserve water on his land, together with his family, and maybe through this, I don't know how they call it in the north, but in the south they call it Noboa.
Noboa.
Yes. Okay. They would spend time to build dugouts or wells so that every farmer can deal with the basic condition for producing: land, water. And to the extent that our policies are not addressing this, we are going nowhere. Those are the points I'd like to make about agricultural this thing. So if you're asking me about the 2018 budget, it's about more of the same. A situation that's leading to the expulsion of smallholders from the land, either through the expansion, the uncontrolled expansion of the settlements, or the grant to large companies, big corporations, which turns them into landless peasants and wage employees. Either way, we are sowing seeds for a future explosion. Either way.
Right.
And the last point, I remember that, I don't know whether you remember this. I remember that in the 2008 campaign, or just before the 2008 campaign, you may recall this name, De Soto. Okay? At that time, then candidate Akufo-Addo was parading his ideas around. Okay, you wonder what has happened to it, because there was a lot of excitement in Ghana at the time. He was being paraded as the new, I wouldn't call Messiah, but, prophet, okay, of the path to agricultural progress. And his argument was really very simple. Producers must have secure property rights in the land they use. That was then, 2008. Okay? In the new program, what was the name? APET. What was it? What was the Akufo-Addo program for economic transformation? I thought that would have been one of the cardinal things to be done. And really, I would really have been excited about it. But it is conspicuously missing. Those are the points I'd like to make for now.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Hesse. Let me come to you, Comrade Mutala.
Well, I think that the professor in agric has spoken. I don't know what I'll add, only to say that I would want to specifically look at what is captured in the budget, what is factual, and what you can describe as infatuation. As a matter of fact, I am particularly interested in this topic because, one, I'm a farmer and I still actively engage in some farming. Two, I also agree with Doctor, and I believe with many people, and of course the two other comrades who will be speaking, that agric for me is at par with education in terms of developing a nation. And as a history student, if you look at civilization throughout the world, civilization indeed succeeded through agriculture, because you need to have enough food to eat, after which you can even have the stable mind to reason. If you look at all the civilizations that we have had, notably, you talk of the Egyptian civilization, which, debatably, and in my opinion, I believe in many other Pan-Africanists, is perhaps the beginning of civilization in the world. If you look at even the European civilization, the Asian civilization to a very large extent dependent on the need for food satisfaction. Now, if you do not have food, it doesn't matter how good your policies are. If you do not have enough food, it doesn't matter how brilliant your leaders are. You cannot achieve to a very large extent what you would have loved to achieve. You first and foremost must have enough food. Now the question you ask yourself is, because that is it's a necessity. And even if you look at even satisfaction of human beings, psychologists will tell you that you must first and foremost have food. In fact, people think of food before they even think of shelter. It tells you how important food is and how important agric is. Now, every single government in this country, whether democratic leaders or military dictators, have always considered agriculture to be as important as education, as health. The extent to which you can solve a lot of the problems we have in this country if you're able to have food, sufficiency. Now, we live in a country where every civil servant, or let me say most civil servants and public servants, you spend almost 30 to 40% of what you earn at the end of the month on food. You wake up in the morning, you must eat, your kids must eat, everybody must eat. In fact, kids goes to school, they must eat. One of the biggest challenge of the free SHS that this government is implementing, aside the infrastructure challenge, aside the lack of cohesion and coordination in this implementation, one of the major challenges also has to do with feeding of the kids. To that extent, agric is sine qua non to the progressive development of this country, and in fact industrialization. Even when people are talking about the need for us to have sufficient and effective supply of energy, you cannot do that if you don't produce enough to propel, if you like, the machinery, the equipment that you would have indeed purchased or even created to be able to achieve the success you would want to achieve in the field of industries. So that is one. Those who are engaged in road construction, they need to eat. Doctors who are engaged in surgery, they need to eat. Teachers need to be satisfied to have a stable mind too. Students need to have enough food to eat to be able to learn. Almost everybody. We sat here, I believe that there are some few things that we take as we have these programs. You live in the morning, that is the first thing you would have to do. So it is very, very important. Now we need to look at policy interventions of successive governments and juxtapose those interventions with what this government is doing. I get the sense that looking at where His Excellency President Nana Addo is coming from, because my understanding and what I have read as a student of history is that he was once, if you like, a leftist. He was once a socialist. In fact, some even describe him once a Marxist or a communist. But of course, politics, as they say, is a national idiot, that at any point in time people can change and can do anything at any point in time. So I get the sense that his focus on agriculture as one that will propel his economic agenda and development is informed by his worldview of Ghana, his worldview of politics, and his worldview of development. And I believe that informed it. And it certainly couldn't have come out of nothing, except the fact that his training in growing up as a young activist, I believe that this would have informed his view. Now, almost every country. Now, if you go to the developed world, America, for instance, they have, I'm told, less than 4% of Americans are engaged in agriculture, yet they feed America and then they feed the world. Now, you come to a part of the world, you would find almost 60% of our population engaged in agriculture, directly or indirectly. Yet we can't even feed ourselves, let alone feed the world. Now the question then is, why have we not been able to do that? Dr. Ampli indeed has stated that, look, you can achieve this if you engage in mechanizing agriculture. America is able to do that, and the other developed world have been able to have fewer people engage in agriculture, and they can produce enough for their state and produce enough for export because they have succeeded in mechanizing agriculture. For us, it is hugely at the subsistence level. But it is also important that in government focusing and trying to drive this agenda, government ought to be very sincere, government ought to be very honest with the people. Because once you do that, now people will begin to follow suit. But if everything that you do is shrouded in absolute falsehood, you certainly would have indeed failed long before you started. Now, I looked at the budget that was presented, and I look at the agric sector. We are told, per the statistics available, that the agric sector is one of the few sectors of our economy that indeed registered or recorded some growth. There has been some growth in the agric sector, and there has been some growth in industries. I think it is now very clear that the growth that we have experienced in industries is informed by oil. So if you segregate the contribution of oil, you would have realized that manufacturing and many other things, zero. Now, if you look at the agric sector, I think that it is important for us to do an intellectual discourse on this. Yes, the agri sector has recorded some positives. I listened to a lot of our colleagues. Yesterday, I was listening to my good friend in the Braddock, one of the deputy ministers of information, Kojo Nkrumah, who brilliantly and cunningly stated that, yes, the agri sector is doing well because of the planting for food and jobs. I mean, sometimes you listen to government communicators and you wonder whether they have considered Ghanaians to be a bunch of idiots. As a matter of fact, we are not. Now, if you take cereals, let's agree, cereals, for instance, and other farm produce, we have two major rain seasons in Ghana. You have the southern Ghana that is experiencing, if you like, 1.5. I don't call it 2 rain seasons, because if you look at the second one, it's just some 2 months that they experienced, or 3. You have the northern region or northern parts of the country, the 3 northern regions, hugely part of Brown Hafo and parts of Volta region that experience 1 rain season. So between January to June is the lean seasons. It means that within that time they don't experience any rains. Now the rains will start somewhere around July, and that is the time people will start tilting the land. That is the time farmers like myself and many other people will start planting. So it is expected that by July, August, September, by ending of September, getting to October, people would have started, harvesting what they planted in somewhere in July. Some would harvest from September, October, November, December. In fact, some farm produce will even get to January. Now, if you look at the contribution of that sector, I'm not saying that places like Greater Accra and Southern Ghana, part of Southern Ghana, do not produce cereals, but to a very large extent, and I can say that over 70% to 80% of these cereals are produced within these 5 regions. You take the 3 northern regions, Brown Hafo, and then you take part of Volta region. Now, if you take the 3 northern regions and Brown Hafo in those areas, they experience 1 rain season. So from January to June, nothing is happening. So when they start in July, that is the time the rains will start, and then they start planting. Now they are expected to start harvesting from September, October, November. Some would even get up to January, as I indicated earlier. Now, for you to be able to determine the impact and the contribution of what these particular places contribute towards agriculture, which would have informed their contribution towards the agri subsector, it means that you would have been calculating it sometimes February, thereabout. Because as at the time they are harvesting, you'll not be able to tell. Because they would have finished harvesting, some would even the processes of drying, after which they send them to market. That is the time that you begin to assess and say that this is the contribution of the agri subsector, specifically on cereals and other farm produce, hugely, about almost 80, if you like, 70 to 80% coming from these regions. Now, how come that the planting for food, and I'm saying this because this government has said that we have registered this huge success in the agri subsector because of planting for food and jobs. Mind you, the planting for food and jobs was not for logging. There hasn't been any government intervention for logging timber, which is also added to afforestation. It wasn't. It was just for these cereals and others. It was not. And as a matter of fact, the planting for food and jobs was not even with cocoa. So the argument that no, we have 2 rainy seasons and you cannot be talking about cereals is absolutely bogus, because they said that the planting for food and jobs has done that miracle that we are experiencing this. Now, be it as it may, how come that the planting for food and jobs, it was launched somewhere in July? The Minister for Agri started talking about planting for food and jobs in July. That was the time they said that they had indeed provided fertilizers and others for farmers. That was what the minister himself told us. Now, for us to be able to assess the impact of the planting for food and jobs, it will be at the end of this year. Now, if you look at the 2017 budget, which is reflected or stated in the 2018 budget, that 2017, we had this as a result of the planting for food and jobs. It's certainly completely misleading, and that is absolute deception. It means that whatever we recorded in 2017 as a contribution of the agri subsector, particularly on the issues of cereals and others was what we had in 2016. It certainly cannot be 2017. That is the first point. So this government completely put the first one on Ghanaians by saying that the planting for food and jobs yielded the success story that we have had. So I just tell the Minister for Agri and the government that for us to be able to find out how impactful the planting for food and jobs is until we finish harvesting, because they started this somewhere in July and people started planting in July. Some are still harvesting. Some of us have not even harvested. People are harvesting. We will yield the benefit. We'll be able to assess the benefit of planting for food and jobs. That is this year. So they can only factor that next year. Now, if you take the cocoa industry, segregate cocoa to alone, you would realize that cocoa has contributed hugely to the agri-sector contribution. Hugely, you can even talk about over 60 to 70% cocoa sector. Now, the benefit, the success story that we have had in the cocoa was not something that was done by this government. It was something that Dr. Opuni Cocoa Board, it was something that the President Mahama and the NDC government policy intervention directly, giving free fertilizers to farmers, providing new seedlings, providing training for cocoa farmers, and in fact, other incentives that were made available to cocoa farmers. That led to the fact that even in the 2018 budget presented by the Minister of Finance stated that cocoa were able to get about 969,000 metric tons. Now, another fat lie was told on this. They claimed that Cocoa Board had indeed, when they were selling the cocoa, the which has embossed on it, not for sale, they said that they were selling it to defray the debt of the 1.8 billion.
Fertilizers.
Yes, as a matter of fact, that is completely fraud. Since 1992, Cocoa Board has never faltered in paying. They have always gone for syndicated loan. Now, Cocoa Board went in for a loan of 1.8 billion. I had the privileged opportunity to have sat on the board. And then we collateralized 750,000 metric tons to pay for the 1.8 billion. Fortunately, we got almost 970,000. Now, if we strike out per the figures provided by the minister himself, if we take 750,000 metric tons from the 969,000 metric tons, you are going to be left with about 219,000 metric tons. Now, a tonnage is sold at $1,900. If you multiply the 219,000 metric tons, it's going to give you $416,100,000. That is what it's going to give you. So there isn't any debt in the first place. And what this government did was a complete fraud. They actually rigged and robbed the cocoa farmers because they had literally paid for the cocoa that was imported or brought in by the previous management and previous administrations and previous government. So they had no business. Last point. Now, it is also found is when I don't know whether I should laugh or I should cry. In the budget that was presented, you had the Minister of Finance who said the Cocoa Board indeed had a budget of 1.6 billion Ghana cedis for cocoa roads. Yet they awarded contracts to the tune of 5.1 billion Ghana cedis. And therefore, there was an excess in their waste. What they said was that there was Cocoa Board had a contracted 5.1 billion and there was a budget, excess of budget of 3.5 billion. I mean, if this is not crass incompetence, then I'll be glad to know one. Now, if you look at the roles that were awarded by Cocoa Board, some of the roles would, every contract, particularly in the road and other infrastructure, have a period of commencement and a period of what? Completion. Now, if you look at the roads, some would finish by 2017. Some would finish, take 2 years, 2018. Some 2019, some 2020, some 2021. 21, 22, because the highest of them would finish in 5 years. So indeed, the budget for all the contracts that were awarded were estimated to be 5.1 billion Ghana cedis. But the 1.6 billion was a budget for work that will commence and complete in 2017. So what happened is that every year you will raise the budget depending on which ones would complete within that year. If we take the Kaswa interchange, the Sofo line interchange, President Kufu awarded the contract at a time when there was not even a budget for it. Take even the Shashi, that road to Eburi. That road was awarded at a time when there was not any budget. So for someone to say that they awarded contracts beyond budgetary allocation. By the way, a budget is supposed to be a year thing. So I think that is another falsehood.
Right.
So let's look at the segregation, and you will come to realize that all the success story that we have had, and for which reason there has been a positive growth, if you like, in the agri sector, was something that this government never did tea on it.
All right. Thank you, comrade, for your submission on the budget with specific attention to the agricultural sector and its performance, the impact on the national development. Comrade Bernard Monao.
Agric is a major sector of our economy that I feel that maybe it requires more time than this. I'll try to contain myself within the budget speech as was read by the Minister for Finance. And one would have noticed that the minister indicated some positives within the agric sector. Indeed, he said about 2,160 university students or university graduates and 1,070 persons were taking 4 extension services by the ministry. He said about 201,000 farmers or farms were registered, and that the government had been able to supply 121,000 metric tons of fertilizer and about 44,000 metric tons of seedlings. And in his estimation, this went a long way to enhance the positive direction that we are seeing in agric. If you do an interrogation of, for instance, the 201,000 workers or farmers that were registered, you have not told us what the components of registrations are. Because I do know that we have a farm, it has been registered. But nothing, not even fertilizer, no seedlings has been supplied to us. So the fact that the district directors of agric registered farms, and these are not new farms, they are existing farms, cannot constitute a success story. So we have existing farms that you just go around, and then the directors of agric, all that they have done is that formally these things were not codified. Everybody was doing their peasantry. And what we have done now is that we have gone to take a pen and a paper, and we have said that Motala, you have 2 plots of, or 2 acres of land, and that is your farm. Dr. Percy has 5 acres, Kwesi Pratt has 10 acres, Bernard Mona has 6 acres. So having registered, how does that constitute a success? Because
take your 2 like that. I was left out, so take your 2 like that.
You understand, this is what we have done, and we catalog this as a success, and we speak with such grandiose that we have done something successful. This is not success in agriculture, and I am a bit aback. My understanding, for instance, of the cocoa sector is that it takes 3 to 5 years for cocoa to reach maturation. The MPP has done 10 months. So where did they start to get the kind of figures?
Hybrid.
That they are saying? It is the hybrid that actually gives you the 2 to 5 years. So we have not even done 1 year.
We're super hybrid.
Super hybrid.
We have not even done 1 year. So if any success or increase in the cocoa production in the country is come in 2017, it means that the work started before today. And it is as a result of that that we are reaping the outcome. To come and bulk it as you having achieved that is a bit of a problem. And indeed, if you read the budget, the budget speech, the minister said that they have successfully repaid the syndicated loan of 1.8. So how come that we are selling fertilizers and other things in order to repay something that the government has already said they have repaid? In the same budget speech, the Minister for Finance said that they've successfully combated fall army worms. And we all know what a Deputy Minister for Agri's loud mouth and ended him. And as we speak, the fall army worm is still around. So to claim that we have successfully combated this is a bit of a problem. There is another statement that was made in the budget speech that shocks me. The minister said that the National Buffer Stock Company, with the ministry, with the Agri Development Bank, has been able to register 553 suppliers or buyers. Register. They have not bought anything. So all we are talking about is that people who come to say that, look, I'm a company capable of supplying to the national buffer stock. Once we register it, it's a success story. How much have they been able to buy for the national buffer stock to stock? That is not contained in the budget speech. Of the 553 that registered, how many of them actually got supplies? That is not also spelled out. But you see, in all this, it appears that cocoa is the only cash crop that has been stated in the budget speech. Cashew, 0. Shea, 0. So all those other sectors. And indeed, if you ask me, what has been done for cocoa, if done to shea, if done to cashew and other crops, this nation will grow better. Because you see, the cocoa farmer doesn't need to carry your cocoa on your head, on a headpan, and be looking for a buyer. We have made it a national policy to buy the produce. We have made it even possible to pay them standard prices. So if we are looking at enhancing other crops in this country, all that we could do is that, look, let's find a way that we can ensure standard pricing and standard market so that we find market for the other persons who are into agric. This is not done. And it is important that we look at it to see how we'll be able to augment and to divert from cocoa alone as a cash crop and to bring in other crops. I can tell you that the major challenge farmers face is not even credit. It is how to market their produce. And anybody who understands a little bit of agric knows that we have a major challenge with perishability. Most of our foods that are produced cannot last beyond for 5 days. For instance, tomatoes. You harvest tomatoes, and if you don't get it out in the next 7 days, it's no more tomatoes. So farmers who are into search, they run at a loss. Anytime there is a bumper harvest, the prices will fall because there's no standardized or standard prices market for them. They have to carry it and be looking for people. Mammy trucks are loaded, and you can understand that anytime they harvest, there is a fall. I did that in the new thinking from the Ministry of Agric, we are looking at how to even provide cold storages to ensure that farmers into mango and other crops that can easily perish, we are going to factor them in. So if you ask my candid view, this is a list of registration and does not tell us how that registration is going to enhance agricultural productivity and incomes of the farmers that are affected.
Thank you, Mr. Mona. I'll come finally to you. We have 10 more minutes. Mr. Pratt.
Well, I think that the fundamental problem confronting our agriculture has not been tackled over a long period of time. In this day and age, the major issue confronting agriculture everywhere in the world is one of national sovereignty. And that is not being addressed at all. Indeed, we've come to the point where continuous production, especially of crops, has become heavily dependent on one giant multinational corporation, Monsanto. When we were young, our farmers produced their own seeds for the next season. Now, the seeds that farmers are planting cannot produce seeds for planting the next season. So every new season, farmers actually have to go and buy seeds. Seeds which are not manufactured locally, seeds which are produced by giant multinational corporations and so on. To the extent that in the event of our having a government which looks after our interest and which therefore will run into confrontation with the major Western powers and so on, our agriculture will collapse. You understand? And I think that this is one of the major problems of our agriculture. And I don't see it, I don't hear it being addressed anywhere. And I'm deeply worried about the neglect of sovereignty over agricultural production, sovereignty over our food, and so on. It's a major problem for me. Having said that, another major problem has to do with post-harvest losses. And some of the figures are mind-boggling. Indeed, for some of the grains and so on, post-harvest losses, the last time I checked, were estimated in the region of 30% to 40%. That's huge losses, you understand? And we need to have a policy framework for dealing with the issue of post-harvest losses. I don't see that anywhere. There are some who say that if you succeed in establishing one factory in every district, it may provide a certain impetus for primary production, using agricultural produce and so on. But that's tangential. There's no serious national policy about, dealing with post-harvest losses. And that for me is a huge problem. Now, if you look at the MPP's manifesto in the last elections, you tend to get a certain appreciation of what they think that agriculture is and what its problems are. For example, when they talk about one village, one dam, they seem to think that the problem there is lack of access to water. You understand? It's clear that they think that the problem there is lack of access to water. Mm-hmm. Yes, irrigation would do us a lot of good and so on. But irrigation, like all the sectors of the national economy, ought to be realistically planned and so on. Now, if you make a promise which scientifically is what do I say? If you make a promise which has no scientific base, then there's a problem. I mean, only recently, the Deputy Minister of Agriculture has told us that the geology of the three northern regions is such that it is impossible to have one dam in every village. That clearly is a statement to the effect that not a lot of science went into the thinking. Because if you're going to make a promise to build one dam in every village, the geology of the regions are exceedingly important. And it does appear that the geology of the region was not taken into consideration at all. You understand? Now, about 3 or 4 days ago, ISA held a press conference to analyze the 2018 budget. And they spoke extensively on agriculture, especially the food for jobs, planting for food and jobs program. And they indicated that it was not sustainable over a long period. They thought that for its short-term ends and so on, it was all right, but it was not a policy which was sustainable over a long period of time. Now, one of the major problems our agriculture has faced has also been the lack of credit. Indeed, the Agricultural Development Bank was established to provide credit for agriculture. Now, Agricultural Development Bank is doing universal banking, and therefore is unable to play the role that it was originally intended to play. Of course, in this budget, there is talk of the establishment of a National Development Bank. And only yesterday, I saw in the graphic a report which said that there was going to be a merger of the Agricultural Development Bank and the National Investment Bank to serve that purpose, I think we've got to be thinking about what resources can be made available to that National Development Bank, and what its portfolio is going to be. If indeed it also becomes another universal bank, then we are in trouble. And if it's not in a position to make credit available to agriculture, cheap credit available to agriculture and so on, then we are in very, very deep trouble. This year has been particularly troubling for agriculture, and all the other colleagues have spoken about the fall armyworm infestation of farms. I'm told that more than 100,000 hectares of farms were destroyed as a result of the fall armyworm infestation. But beyond that, we had the African swine flu, African swine fever, which affected, the pig population significantly, and indeed it spread all the way from the upper east, upper west regions to the Brown Heifer region. And at the last count, even Ashanti was reporting cases of the African swine, fever and so on. So that's also one of the things that we needed to take into account. Then, of course, there was the bird flu, and the complaint from poultry farmers that they had not been compensated for their birds which had been put to rest and so on. So agriculture faces very significant, problems this year and going into next year. And I'm surprised that some officials are predicting bumper harvest and so on in the light of all these problems. Whatever it is, as Bernard Mona indicated, discussing agriculture for 5 minutes, it's an impossibility. And I do hope that we'll have a lot more time to discuss agriculture as we go into the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pratt, for your submission. I'll read a few text messages and then we will check out of here and hand you over to the sports team for Nana Dakwajisi and Adamu Muftau to join us with sports, which will be taken over immediately after Alhaji and Alhaji comes to an end. And Stephen Gau tweets and says, government must pay serious attention to the agricultural sector of this country since they said it's the backbone. Musa Abatwa tweets and says, Wahala budget isn't a true reflection of the microeconomic indicators. It's empty and full of lies. Ebola budget is to satisfy family members. Raymond tweets and says, how do you solve a problem with the Minister of Education believing that students sleeping outside simply because they want fresh air, not that they lack accommodation? Wanda Agbasa tweets and says, how can one download the program? Okay, I think you can listen to the show again on Wednesday after 9. And those, I believe, are a few of the text messages that came on Facebook and Twitter. I am grateful to you that you made time to join us today on Alhaji and Alhaji, the mother of all talk shows. My name is Samuel Lishen, and I've been here with Mr. Kwesipa Jr., the managing editor of the Insight newspaper, Dr. David Percy, student of history and politics, Mr. Bernard Mona, national chairman of the PNC, Comrade Murtala Ibrahim Mohammed, former MP for Nanton and a deputy minister for trade and industry, And the topics we looked at today, as much as we were not able to look at the final one for lack of time, we discussed thoroughly the warning by the immediate past president of CHAS on the challenges facing the free SHS policy and government's promise to address those challenges. 2, we looked at the 2018 budget with specific attention to the growth of the agricultural sector and its impact on national development. And we were supposed to have touched base with the issues and happenings within Zimbabwe and the fact that a new president has been sworn in, the future that awaits the people of Zimbabwe. But unfortunately, time did not allow that. Once more, my name is Sami Ishen, and the production is being by Mr. Patrick. As for Boadu, John was here to help us. The security guys, we are grateful. The drivers who brought us here, we are grateful. The technical team as well, we are grateful to you for such a fine production. I wish you God's blessings even as you enjoy your weekend. And catch you Monday morning on the Gold Power Drive. Once more, my name is Sami Ishen. God bless.
He has labored, he has suffered to lead his people into the land of freedom. He is the Redeemer and the champion of liberty, of human equality.